All right, you've laid the groundwork. You've, again, decided you want to be a traveler, or you want to learn more about becoming a successful traveler, whichever the case may be. You've done all that prep work. You feel confident. You're ready to go. We're going to talk about phase 2, part 2 of Newbie Boot Camp, which is securing your first assignment. This is what everyone wants to get to. Again, well, I'll tell you later, but don't rush that first episode. Part 1 is more important. But today, on this week's edition of Travel Evolve, we're going to talk about securing that first assignment. All the things that are going to go into that, what you need to be aware of, what you need to look for. We're going to jump into all of it on Newbie Boot Camp Part 2 on this week's edition of Travel Evolved. It's Travel Evolved. I am Mark Holloway, CEO of Next Gen MedStaff. Bringing this to you. Next Gen MedStaff is, I guess, sponsoring. I don't know how to put it. Hey, on that note, I want to say one thing. I do know that recently, again, you guys may know that I'm not a healthcare guy. I mean, this was not what I got my education in. I'm an advertising major, ironically. And what's so funny is that the moment I graduated from college, I'm so old that the World Wide Web, as they were calling it back then, kind of came out right after I graduated. None of us in marketing or advertising were taught anything about it because no one knew what it was going to become. So I'm smart enough to know that I don't know everything for sure. And I certainly am humbled frequently about advertising and marketing this day and age. It's a completely different ballgame. You know, I was raised and taught by professors that were in the Mad Men era. I mean, just ridiculously whatever era where you go out and have martinis at lunches and you were selling and how to figure out how to sell stuff. This stuff is different. So that's a long story to tell you that recently we actually did put some sponsorship on Travel Evolved. It is not to make money. It is because it gets put out there more when you actually have some sponsorship to it. Those podcast platforms, wow, it's late. YouTube, we're not sponsored on YouTube, but on the podcast platforms, it actually markets your stuff more. So it is, I mean, our audience is, listen, we're not Joe Rogan or anybody like that. Our audience is not big enough. Anybody that's ever done anything like this will tell you. I'll put it this way. I think we've got like $2 in the thing. It is not meant for that. And I apologize. I know it's a pain in the butt, but do understand that we're not doing it for monetary reasons. We're not going to be that big. There's not enough healthcare travelers that will ever probably watch us or listen to us to make any whatever. Maybe in 10 years I'll be able to take the staff out for a lunch. Probably not, because in 10 years the cost of living will be even higher than it is right now. But I did want to explain that. And I apologize for the interruptions during the podcast. If you don't like that, go to the YouTube. It's not sponsored yet. I don't know if it ever will be. But it does help to market this a little bit more. They want you to do that. They actually want me to read sponsored ads. That would help. I'm not going to go that far. They want you to have people pay to subscribe commercial free. I'm not going to do that. And they also want to open up for people to donate money for all the education time. Listen, we're doing this at Next Gen MedStaff because we think it's important. I did share with you guys in episode 99, if you haven't watched that one, it's all about Next Gen MedStaff, and we did promote the crap out of our company in that one because we thought it was important, and it would be stupid not to. But we feel, and still do, that educated travelers, our company, our agency, our Recruiterless app makes more sense to an educated traveler. So why not educate travelers? It is about time anyway. So we're so lucky that the two go hand in hand. We aren't one of those companies that have to feel like we've got to keep secrets from you. I actually believe, and always have, the more knowledgeable you are, the more we make sense. And that's part of it. So for those that are newbies, we might not make a lot of sense. I've said before, I think, that for a lot of brand new travelers, a recruiter model might make more sense. I mean, I guess I really do think that. I think that if you're lucky enough, we've had a lot of people that never traveled before. As you guys may know, I literally talk to every single person that starts or is about to start an assignment with our company. I think it's important, and I ask them about the app and what their experience was. I ask for ways to improve, how the customer service was going, making sure it felt just like another agency. It just the salesmanship was taken out. But it's not that often that we get somebody that has never traveled before. It's almost unfortunate because when they do, there's not a lot of comparison, so we don't look as good as we do for those that have been with the recruiter model for so long. All right, enough with the self-promotion. I didn't mean to go that way, but what I'm getting at is that we did that so that more people would find us. I mean, we really want more people to see this series, to see these episodes. We think they're important. I love the fact that I'm lucky that that educating travelers goes hand in hand with what we're doing. So know that. I mean, just again, I'm always transparent. It's if it wasn't, I've done stuff like this before, even when we were a recruiter agency. You guys all that know me long enough know I've always been educating travelers. I think that's important. I used to pay more than anybody else, so I wanted people to know what they were walking away from. There was always a method to my madness, but this kind of whole thing it just goes hand in hand, and I'm just lucky, and that's why I'm so happy. That's why I sleep good at night. That's why I love what I do again, which I didn't think I was going to ever again. I didn't like the way the industry was headed, but I love doing this because I can help travelers, and I also think I can help the company I'm a CEO of because I think we look more attractive to the ones that understand what's going on, and they understand the differences between us and everybody else, if not most other companies. So at any rate, we are going to jump into part 2 today. A lot more stuff here today because there's just some things I want to talk about. I'm going to pre-qualify this and say, and I'll tell everybody this, if you hear me repeat things on episodes, it just means you're a devout listener, and I love you and I appreciate you and thank you for that. I can't always guarantee that everyone that's watching this isn't the first time they've ever seen us, so please understand that when I repeat things like we're going to talk about here today about proper pay and how you should be paid, I know that gets monotonous for those that listen to every episode, but it reaffirms that. But I also am doing it because I think there's people that have never listened to anything else I've done, and this is the first thing they've ever caught. So I want them to get an understanding of how the industry has changed and how travelers are accepting things that they shouldn't be accepting. So, at any rate, I'm recording this on Halloween. I don't usually record on weekdays. Certainly, I have done some weeknights before. I don't think I've ever done one. Maybe I have out here in California, but I waited because it's Halloween, so it's the 31st of October, which is a Tuesday night. I don't usually record on that. I will admit I just finished watching a hockey game. I was waiting for it to cool off down here because it was actually like 82 degrees here, and I'm right on the coast. Basically, I'm 2 blocks from the beach currently, and so usually we get some wind, but it's just beautiful here. I just love it. It's still, if I have to look behind, it's still 78 degrees here. So I was hoping it would cool off. It hasn't yet, so I'm a little warm, but I've got the window opens, and I'm trying to see how it goes. So bear with me. Again, probably a whole bunch of unnecessary stuff. We're going to talk today. The subtitle of this episode is, again, Securing Your First Assignment. A lot here. The first thing I want to say is I want to implore a lot of you that I re-listened to the audio of part 1 of Newbie Boot Camp, and I understand why I wrote the episode the way I did. I didn't want to repeat 100 and whatever episodes of information that we've already heard. So I feel a little bit bad because I went back and just kind of told you to listen to some episodes. I should have done a little bit more detail on some of that stuff, but I really will tell you that before you start listening to this episode, if you didn't go back and listen to some of those critical episodes about company margins, how agencies make money, how recruiters make money, the pie for sure, all of those episodes that I highlighted and many others, I think you should stop, and I think you should go back and listen to those before you move into this. You're not ready to start taking your first assignment, in my opinion. And just, again, download a few, listen to them. I know that, listen, it's got to be tough. I don't watch these or listen to them after I record them because I can't stand it, because I just don't. Trust me, if you ever do anything like this, social media, you won't watch yourself either because you'll drive yourself nuts. So I don't do that. I know how hard that is to sit there and listen to me just go blah, 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 blah. And a lot of those episodes are just me because I want to get things out. I put bullet points down, as you guys can probably clearly see, but everything I say is from up here based upon the information that I've given myself some cues for, because it's almost 25 years of that. In a month it'll be 25 years. I think I actually started sometime around mid-November of, has it been 20? Maybe it's 24 years. I may be saying the wrong number. Maybe it's only 24 years. I'll have to look. I think it was November of 1999. So that would be, is it 24 or 20? I think that's 20. I'll do the math. Let me know. I don't want to do it on camera. Usually I'm really good at math, but it is late. You can probably see what time it is there. So it's late here. So before you start listening to this one, I'm just going to say it one last time. Go back and watch some of these episodes if you haven't. They're important. Please skip the ones that we're talking about food or how to make the most of the assignment, those sorts of things. But the numbers itself, how the business model works, you have to understand the things that you guys don't typically get from anybody else but me, and that is, what is the agency doing? How does the agency come up with my pay? How does the agency come up with their margins and what's left for me? How do taxes work? What is taxed? What are they paying? What are they paying taxes on, and what aren't they paying taxes on? Again, we just did a few episodes ago with my good friend Joe Conte. We got to understand about taxes and that sort of thing. These are all really important before you start talking to companies. Okay, so I'll qualify with that. So here we go. We're going to assume now that you've done all that work, you've listened to that, you've talked to your peers, by the way, not just me, and now you, in fact, are ready to start reaching out and starting to talk to some agencies about, I'm ready to go. You've got things cleared personally. Whether you are single or you've got a partner or a spouse and you've got kids and all that stuff has been taken care of. You know that you can, hopefully you've left and are leaving with good terms on your permanent facility. You always want to do that because you just never know when this lifestyle will no longer be for you. So I would urge you to say that. I should have done that the first episode, but I didn't. And we're going to assume now that you're ready to go. So it is really where you're starting to go out and reach out and find some companies. The first thing I want to talk about is that you kind of need to do that sooner than you think. Now, I think that goes for almost any time. Again, I keep referencing the pandemic, and I don't know how to stop referencing it because it's such an unusual time frame that was probably the one time period, and it obviously was about 2.5 years, maybe even 3 for those that jumped in early and stayed till the very end, that you could get assignments like that. I can't tell you how many hospitals were doing auto offers where you send in the right information, like, yeah, send her. They just needed bodies, and they were less scrupulous, if you will, or they were less detail oriented on who they were choosing. They just needed patient care, and that, I don't know if that'll ever happen again. I don't know if that's good or bad, but more often than not, and especially right now, again, we're recording this on Halloween of 2023, and this may not age well, we'll see, but I'm hoping that there aren't that many times like there are right now. And right now, things are tight. So again, if you're a newbie traveler, we're kind of assuming here at Travel Evolved and at Next Gen Med Staff that maybe you don't have an awful lot of experience yet in your field of allied or nursing. Maybe you have a lot of experience, but you don't have any or very, very little amount of travel experience. So if you are in that ballpark, again, like I said last episode, you may have less of a chance. I'm just going to throw it out there like it is. The less experience you have and the less travel experience you have, that is going to hinder you, which means you have to be aware of the obstacles in front of you, which means, again, we're going to talk about marketability quite extensively today. That's part of it. And I mentioned it a lot last week where you really have to consider opening up some options. And again, only you guys know this. So some recruiters are hesitant to tell you, but I will tell you that you have to treat yourself with an honest approach. How do I stack up next to every other, travel professional that's in rehabilitation, if I'm a speech language pathologist, nursing, if I'm an RN, how do I stack up on paper? And you have to really think about it. What do I look like with the current staff that I've been working with? Am I brand new? Do I have more experience than them? Those are all indicators on how flexible you're going to have to be with regard to the assignments that you're looking for, with regard to pay, potentially location, and how popular they're going to be, because it's all about supply and demand. So please know that before you go through. It could take you longer than you think to secure your first assignment. So number one, don't burn your bridge on your current job until you're really close. Most facilities will only require a 2 weeks notice. Now, you'll know better than I do. If you have a 4-week notice, that is going to be tough to overcome no matter what, because you certainly don't want to put in a notice until you secure a job. And most hospitals and facilities are not willing to wait a month for a traveler once they make them an offer, and then obviously, a month plus based upon, usually assignments start on Mondays. So you're going to have to, I guess, cross that obstacle. But I can tell you, it is almost never where you can or allowed to give a month's notice, unless you're talking about, again, we would get job orders this time, here the last day of October, we'd start seeing January 1st, start dates. That's the one exception, seasonality places where they know they're going to have an increased census. We're not seeing that yet this year, and I don't think we're going to. I think they're going to wait until the census is there before they order. We're not seeing that. That's about the only time you can get a 4-week notice, which tells you, even this year especially, if you're in a 4-week notice situation, you're going to have to break that probably if you want to travel. It's going to be almost impossible for you to work your fanny off, get a job, get an offer, sign a contract, and then hope that the hospital's willing to wait a month. They probably won't, so realize that. Going to take a little longer than you think. Again, I mentioned this last week, but here is where that creating a business mindset, treating this like you have a business now that is about revenue, gaining revenue and how much money you can make, about lowering your expenses, which means you're going to want to, again, you know, what am I willing to sacrifice financially as far as how nice the place I'm going to stay in, how far away am I willing to drive? All those things are up to you, but you have to really consider that with each and every one of these things we're going to talk about today. And we're going to have to look at cost of living and how expensive, those areas are that you are, potentially being submitted to and maybe even getting offers for. So you got to create that business mindset right away. And what I mean by that, and I'll go into some of that episode here briefly. I already mentioned it. You've got to look at yourself like you are your own, income, cost of goods sold, operating expenses, and bottom line. In other words, everything, I'm supposed to have a superfood shake. I'm going to turn it upside down because it's going to keep going off. Everything is based upon that. So yes, of course, when you start looking at some of these things, you're going to want to start saying, how much money can I possibly make? And this is where we talked last time. It is a lot about where you want to go. And again, this is up to you, not anybody else. Only you know what where you want to go and how much you're willing to make, or how little you're willing to make potentially for that destination. So for some of you, and you guys know, I love travelers that are money focused, because that's where our company shines. And especially right now when we're still in that client acquisition mode, I want travelers that want to make as much money as they can at whatever destination they can. My hope is with Next Gen MedStaff on our app is that we have the job you're looking for. Because if we have the job, you're going to make more money with us and at that given job. And we basically almost guarantee it. It's never happened where our bill rate's been the same so far. Like I said last time, we happened one time, but we found our bill rate wasn't the same. So it was unfair. What we don't have is every job in the country. So if you've got a job across town that we don't have and it pays more, take it. That's the whole point. Why would I ever convince you not to? You want that revenue stream to be high, and you want to start looking at your expenses and have those being low. But also when it comes to creating a business mindset, what I'm also talking about is you have to start looking at, and I think this is important, looking at an annualized yearly income. What do I feel like I need to make annually in order for me to justify becoming a traveler? And I think that's an important thing you need to talk to yourself about. You're making this kind of money here at potentially your home facility, let's assume. And now you're going to step up your game. You want to make money. It has to be a number that makes sense. If it's less than that, it probably doesn't make sense to go ahead and take this risky lifestyle. And it is risky, ladies and gentlemen. And nobody in my position is willing to tell you guys that. It's risky. Every time you go into that hospital, you are risking, am I going to get one more day? I know you're signing 13-week contracts, but go back and listen to guaranteed hours. You'll find that you really aren't guaranteed an awful lot, because we're not guaranteed an awful lot from the agency. A hospital can terminate you instantly for a variety of reasons, and there's nothing you or we or the vendor, frankly, can do about it. They're going to look and find somebody else that either fits them better or has a different attitude, or they're just going to realize that maybe they didn't have the need at all, and they're going to drop you, and they're going to make some excuse other than a census decrease, or that they don't need you anymore and that they over-ordered. We all know that. You guys may not, but that could happen. So if you're going to take that risk, there has to be kind of a number that you have created in your own head of, here's where I need to be financially in order to justify this. And I'll probably, for today's episode, I'll probably use 100,000 because I think it's a good round number. And for some of you, that may not be enough. For some of you, that may be more than what you're making. It depends upon your specialty. It depends upon a lot of different things. But I'll use that today. So what I'm getting at is you're looking at making $25,000 for all of your 4 assignments, even if you extend it one more than once. So it may be 3 at one place and 1 more. That's what you're looking at. That has to come into play. And I implore you guys that don't sell yourself short. I understand that right now bill rates are low, which means all companies are paying less. So you may be below that desired. And if it drops below where you think you can get back up to that level, you're probably going to stop traveling. And I would say you probably should, because it doesn't justify the risky lifestyle that most of you have enjoyed. Unless you just love that lifestyle and money isn't as important to you, which some of you are in that boat. So if that's the case, you're looking at, I really want to go to these locations this year. This is where I really want to be for family reasons, for personal reasons, all the things that only you know about. And so that's the other thing you should be thinking about before you contact anybody is, here are the things that are important to me. This kind of income potentially, and also maybe this kind of location or a combination of those. So have that in mind before you start talking to some recruiter who's just going to start pushing you into some positions. It's very, very important. So think about those locations. And again, I kind of already covered this, but it really should be those different variables that you're kind of considering. Have it written down so that you aren't going, well, gee, I don't know. Think about the locations that you would be willing to go to. Have a plan A, in other words, especially on locations. I think you have that plan A, B, C financially, and if it drops below C, you probably don't need to be looking at those assignments. For location, I think you should always shoot for where you want to go. If it doesn't pay well enough currently because of seasonality, because of the market trend, or because you're talking to the wrong company, then you put that on the back burner and you say, okay, my plan B is now this. And I think most of you should have a potential plan C. Here's the group of states or locations that I'm willing to go to, even if the money is less, or even if there's less competition, I can get a job there, but I'm not willing to go to the rest of these states. So I've got my A's, my B's, and my C's. I think it's a really good thing to have in mind before you start talking to anybody. Okay, so first thing I already said the first thing. I always do that. First thing I want to say, and I've said like 8 things. Another thing that I think is important. Here's what I'm going to say now, and this has changed for me, by the way, in the last 6 months. I now believe currently, and I think this will also change in the next 6 months, but right now, fall of 2023, I believe you should have at least 3 different types of agencies that you're contacting them. The thing that's changed for me is I now think currently it's smart to have a monolith, humongous company as one of the companies you're going to call. And again, you tell me anybody else that's in my position that's going to call or it's going to make that call. No one's going to recommend that you even talk to anybody but just the one company that they represent. I think it's crazy. I don't think you should put all your eggs in one basket, and I don't think you should put all your eggs in a monolith basket. I'll explain why. Right now, because of the lowness of positions, and again, if you're listening to this in 2028, this may not even apply anymore. I don't know. Maybe I would tell you at that point, if there's a whole bunch of jobs, I would probably take these guys off the list, because you're going to make less with these guys than anybody else. That's just the facts. What they bring to the table right now, though, is a whole bunch of positions. And for you, if you're low on experience, years of experience, if you're low on travel experience, this is where you start to build up your on-paper profile, if you want to call it that. What do I look like on paper? And these monolith companies are going to get you a job. It might be that plan C. Be willing to look at that. A medium-sized or a small company might not have any jobs that make sense to you right now, because, as I've mentioned many times before, and I just did an episode about monolith companies, you should listen to that now, after this one, so you kind of understand what you're getting in bed with. Those companies do provide a really good service right now, where I think that they could be your plan C. In other words, that could be what I'm going with, and you don't have to look at a plan D. Now, they're going to start slamming in front of everything, but you've got to be very careful with talking with those big companies, and I'll explain that too. You are dealing with a humongous company. You are just a number for that recruiter. You are just a number for that company. But again, they may be the ones that can get you a job right now. So right now, currently, I would add those to that list. I think they would be the first ones I would take off the list if you are, if the job market is high, if there's a big demand for nurses and for allied professionals right now. I would say that would be the first group that I would take off the list, because what most new travelers do is they go with these big companies because they get them jobs. And then they leave them when they realize that almost every other agency out there can either match or pay them more. That's where it gets kind of tough. These companies cannot pay a lot. There's reasons. I defended them. I told you why they can't pay a lot. It's their model. It works for them. It makes sense. They are a high volume, have clients everywhere. They can secure a position for you. They're good. Their pay is just a little bit lower because they have higher operating expenses. That's just the way it is. They're also almost all, I know one that's not publicly traded, so they've got shareholders and they've got to show profit. So they show profit for their shareholders. There's reasons behind all of this stuff. But if you're new, they're a good potential, and I would include them for sure right now. I would be one of the first calls I would make. However, I want to clarify, and I want you to put some instructions. When you talk to a recruiter from one of these companies, you need to make it very, very clear, and I would say the same thing with the next group I'm going to talk about. I do not want you submitting me unless you and I specifically talk about this location and you run the pay package by me so I can do some research to see if I want to do it, because they will. Most companies that are recruiter, based, I shouldn't say most, hopefully not most. Big companies tend to more frequently, they will start slamming you in front of anything. That recruiter wants his or her commission. So I know you said you wanted, Phoenix, next thing you know, you're going in front of Flagstaff, which is like night and day from Phoenix in many months of the year. But they'll do it, and you'll take the job because you're like, well, they got me an offer, and it's just bad business. And I would recommend telling them, please don't do that. Please, please, please don't do that. So qualify that for them. I think it's kind of very, very important. I want to make sure I'm going over the stuff I wanted to go over. So yes. Okay, good. It's really important that you put some limitations on that monolith company, what you are willing and what you are not willing to let them submit you to. The second thing the second group I want to tell you is that I really would think right now, especially as a newbie, I can't help but be fully transparent and say, you guys always know, I'm going to be really candid with you. This is not about promoting everything I'm doing. I'm going to include us. Trust me, that's our philosophy is number 3, so I'll just preempt that right now. I would say that you do need to find a company that has a recruiter that you seem to see eye and eye with. Again, you have now learned these numbers. So the second thing I'll tell you, and I'm going to get more detail on this as I go. I actually realize I jumped ahead, but I want to cover this right now. I think it's important that, especially if you're a newbie, especially if you don't really feel comfortable with looking at your own stuff and being able to evaluate, I don't know how that can really come into play. Unless, I guess this way, if you haven't listened to most of what we have said in all these over 100 episodes, and you haven't talked to anybody or have a mentor, like I said in the first part of this thing, in part 1 I should say, then I do think you absolutely categorically should stick with a recruiter model, because I think you need that right now. Again, if you're watching this and it's 2028, I went on record and said, I think in 5 years, and I said that a little while ago, if it's Halloween of 2028, I had predicted 6, 7, 8 months ago that by that time frame, most companies would be on a recruiter list model. We'll find out if I'm right. I could be a little bit off on how long it's going to take. It might be faster, it might take longer, but I really do think that 5 years is a long time in our current state of technology, and I think that, again, so if you're listening to this thing 5 years from now, you may be like, what is he talking about? That doesn't even make sense anymore. But right now, I think that working with a recruiter makes sense to a lot of you. I think it does give you some things to compare. It helps you compare some prices from some monolith companies. It's going to help you compare some prices for some recruiter-less options that I think are important. But here's what I want to say about this, and I'll get into some greater detail in a minute in this episode. I think you really need to pick the right recruiter who also is working for the right company that has the right margin, if that all makes sense. There's a lot there. And again, if you haven't listened to anything else we've done, none of this is going to make sense to you. You have to make sure that your recruiter understands these numbers, that they're not trying to gloss over you. If you know more about the money and how it's being paid and how to properly be paid than your recruiter, you're in trouble. Now, again, there's a lot of recruiters that don't know as much as you guys do about this. I can promise you that. As of the recording of this episode, most recruiters either don't know, haven't thought about, or have not been given permission to talk about proper ways to be paid. And I'm talking about the things that I'm going to go into detail with: hours 36 to 40, overtime, how the whole thing works, orientation hours, how everything is, nothing is transparent in our industry except for a few of us agencies, and that's what's got to change. If you have listened to what we are talking about, or you have a mentor or somebody that has really educated you on the numbers and how to really be able to tell good deals from bad deals, then you're in good shape. And I think finding a recruiter Again, I wouldn't find a company. That's changed also for me. 5 years ago, I said find the right company, a company that has good margins, that has a good philosophy, doesn't have a lot of turnover with the recruiting. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think now my mind has changed that you need to find a recruiter that you hit it off with, that you trust. Again, realize these are salespeople, but you have to have a good amount of trust with a recruiter that they're submitting you fast, that you're being called quickly when there's an opening that matches what you're looking for, that they're not trying to make more commission by keeping more money out of your pocket and into the company's pocket. All these things that we've discussed in detail on Travel Evolved, you need to make sure you're hitting it off with. So I will say right now, and maybe for a while, even you're a new traveler and have never done this before, I like having it where you've got a monolith company so you can compare that experience with that recruiting experience, that pay package, and the abundance of jobs with a recruiter company. And then the last thing I'll talk about is I think you should go with a recruiterless model. It doesn't have to be Next Gen MedStaff. Again, I'm going to predict this. I fully believe that as we move into down the road and as years go by, more and more current companies will have either recruiterless options, or they'll be switching to recruiterless, or there'll be more and more companies that have recruiterless options as well. Right now, as of the recording of this, Next Gen MedStaff is the only company that I know of that is completely recruiterless, and it's all app, smartphone based. There is no website where you go and check. We don't want you to go and check and have to be, strapped to a PC or a laptop every time you want to get something, or have to check your email to see if an email notification came in. We know things change, so we want an app that was with you all the time, so when you're done with your shift, I know a lot of you can't even have phones while you're there, or if you're lucky enough to be able to have a phone, you can use it during a break if you're lucky enough to get one, that you can look and see if you've got any notifications, because an app lets you know about the jobs you're looking for and not about the ones you're not. And like I've said before, when you're switching your preference around, all of a sudden, I don't want to go there, or I still want to go there, but I'm also now going to go to my plan B's and plan C's. You don't have to call a recruiter and hope, or recruiters, and hope that they get that message and they put you into that mix of things too, so they're starting to call you on those. Again, we'll talk about it in greater detail, but I do think that whether it's a web-based and you like that model where you can go and see the jobs fine, or a recruiterless app, I think that's great. Now, I do want to clarify right now that I'm not talking about a job market app where some of these companies, I won't mention their names, where the companies where they're promoting the top paying companies. You guys do need to understand that those apps that you're using are only promoting the companies that pay them a whole bunch of money monthly to be able to be listed as what they are. It's not real. It's actually complete what. They're only giving you the top jobs of the companies that are willing to pay them $10,000 to $15,000 a month to promote their jobs. There are a ton of companies that don't work with those guys that probably pay more, but they're the ones that are footing that bill. So you guys really need to understand that it was a great idea, but it's only a great idea if they truly are letting all agencies participate. You're only seeing the agencies that are paying them a huge chunk to promote their companies. And again, like I've said with this industry, where do you think that money is inevitably going to come out of? Your pay. It's not the companies that say, well, we're going to take, we're going to go down to a Next Gen MedStaff margin, or we're going to go down to 20% because we're getting that person through this type of a marketplace app. That's not what I'm talking about. I don't think those are, I think they were good for the pandemic, because I think you could take some of the bigger companies that are willing to pay those and kind of sort them out. But I'll tell you guys right here, I honestly will tell you, you are missing out on a whole bunch of companies, not even mine. There's a whole bunch of companies that are paying more for those jobs than those companies. They're only showing you the companies that are paying them to be listed and to be marketed. So please know that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like an agency that is strictly recruiterless, whether you're going to a website, whether you're going to an app on your phone, or a combination of those. Or maybe by the time this comes out, there may be some agencies that do both, and I would be looking at just the recruiterless option for those, because I think that's important. What that's going to allow you to do is kind of compare some rates. And again, with my company, all I can tell you is that we're still in client acquisition mode. We were lucky. We started this company out, as you guys know, right in the middle of the pandemic. We had the idea beforehand, but our app took a while. So everyone was jumping on. We were getting every contract on the planet. Well, now all those contracts are scaled back because we haven't been around long enough to really show what we can do yet. It's still a new concept. So people will jump on our app and go, well, I'm not seeing a lot. Agreed. Perfect. I'm not telling you, and I hope nobody else does that has a recruiter's model, that you should only stick with us. I don't think that's a good idea right now. Again, for us personally, I can only speak from our, from Next Gen MedStaff's point of view. Right now, Halloween of 2023, I think you'd be crazy to use us as your only option. What most people that work with us, and we've had, again, I won't tell you the numbers, but we have a lot of people that are currently working with us and a whole bunch more that go back and forth. What I'm being told from a lot of people, and I'm sure that some of these other companies that are similar to what we're doing, whether they're web-based or they do a combination of, it is usually people's first choice because the pay is higher. But if you can't find the assignment, you got to go look somewhere else. And that's why I think a combination of those three makes sense. Now, I'm only limiting it to 3 because I have learned in all my years of experience, and now I got to go back and decide if it's 24 and 25. I'm like one of those old people. I mean, old people, I'm getting there too. Like, I remember my grandfather always would say, I'm in my 85th year when he was only 84. So maybe I'm doing that already. I'm pushing a year on top of what I'm at. I don't know. It's either 24 or 25 years here in a month. I want to say maybe it's only 24. I think I just added a year somehow magically. So in all those years, I think that travelers have told me in 24 or 25 years that it is a pain to fill out paperwork for more than 3 companies. Now again, you guys know for us, we don't require a stitch of paperwork. So that's why I am going to push us. You can see every job we have without having to send a single iota of paperwork into us, which means you can all you have to do is register for the app, which means you put your email in and you verify your phone number and you can instantly see jobs. Now, if you go to apply to one, it's going to recognize that you're not registered and we can't even text you and say, hey, we need your paperwork. So you're not even allowed to apply. Once you register and do those things, then you can see everything. But you don't even have to give us your cell phone or your email to just view our jobs. We're that comfortable that we say, if someone else has this job at XYZ hospital, this shift, this specialty, beat it. And if someone does, I'm telling you right now, take it. So that option to me makes a lot of sense because I get it. It is hard to fill out paperwork. So that's why I'm kind of limiting this to 3. If you are willing to do 4 or 5, I would add another recruiterless option and I would add another recruiter company. I would not add another monolith company. I wouldn't add 2 recruiter companies. I'll talk about the recruiter companies. I think you got to find the right fit there. And if you're not seeing what you're looking for, I'm going to tell you to keep looking until you find the right fit. But I think once you found your fit of that recruiter that is coupled with an agency that has good solid pay rates, good reputation, seems to know what they're doing, you may have found your person. And I think it's the recruiter that you are working for, not necessarily the company. I believe that to this day. So, all right. I guess a couple things I want to talk about. Be careful, and let's go into some of this in detail. Be careful of what I just said. I think you should be very careful right now of taking an agency as being what your recruiter experience has been. Like I just said, I think the experience has to do with recruiters. Here's what I will tell you. I've said this before, and again, if I repeat myself, it's because I don't know if this is the first time you've watched me. Yes, if you talk to multiple recruiters at one company and you get the same kind of feel, that's a good feeling because I think that means that they've done a good job of that agency in training and educating and promoting that agency's model. And again, I'd be hard pressed for someone to tell me what is the difference between that agency and any other agency. It's about the impression you get. It means it's well ran. But if you have to talk to anybody else there and you get a different vibe, then it doesn't mean the company's bad. It just means that you clearly have hit it off with a recruiter. And I think more importantly, that's the biggest part of this industry now. I used to look for recruiters. Everybody out there is doing the same thing. Every recruiter company, whether you're a monolith or just starting up, you are looking for the best recruiters to represent you. That is your voice of the company. So you train them and teach them to make your company look good. That's part of their sales job. They're doing the best they can. And I've always said, I feel bad for great recruiters who are good people, who are great salespeople, that should be making a lot of money in the industry, that work for companies that have big margins and offer lower pay. That has got to be a tough thing, and it's hard. They probably make more money, but they work a lot harder to convince a traveler to take an assignment. I mean, it has got to be difficult. Think about that for a minute. How hard would it be to recruit for a company? And we all know 300 companies plus have the exact same job. So if I'm looking at a job in, let's just say Sarasota, Florida, I know 300 companies probably have that job. And I'm talking to a great recruiter I love, but they're like one of the lowest paying. So imagine that being your day in, day out. It has got to be hard. You're basically trying to hurry up and get someone to book with you and hope that they like you and stay with you. And that works sometimes more so than the money you're making, because What I learned a long time ago is you guys talk. I love that. I think that's important. And you compare paycheck stubs. And why do you think it is your agency doesn't want you doing that? If they are scared of you comparing a paycheck stub, more often than not, that's why, because they're low. If they're less nervous about it, that means they're probably one of the higher companies. And that's kind of what you're looking for. So what I'm getting at is don't confuse company with recruiter. I think you should be looking for the right recruiter that happens to work for the right company, that happens to have the right pay package, if that all makes sense. So it's all about pay rates, and I think that's part of it. So as you're looking for that company, be very, very careful. I would call a lot of companies. I wouldn't just call one monolith company. I would call 4 or 5 of them. That's about how many there are. And I would see who you get the best vibe from there. Again, you're probably talking recruiter-wise, but you're also looking at potentially for both these types of companies, and even for a recruiter's model, where do they seem to have most of their positions? This is where you're going to need to tell that recruiter, I'm kind of looking for these locations. I kind of need you to give me a ballpark based upon my experience and my specialty. What's the average, going weekly gross at all of these different locations, and you're going to start to see it. Then I would call another, big company, another medium-sized company, start comparing the pay rates with those, and you've got to do your homework. This is where, again, I'm only sending paperwork into 3 different companies, but I'm going to call and interview a bunch of them because I think that's very, very important. I think it's one of the biggest mistakes newbie travelers make is they trust a traveler that said, I liked XYZ company, and they just roll with it, and they don't really shop around because they're so excited about hitting the road. I understand that, but you got to slow down and do this right. Otherwise, you're going to regret every week when you get your paycheck that, man, I wish I would have been smarter. I could have been working at the same hospital with a different agency, making a couple of $100 or even $50 more a week. It's going to make you mad. So slow down, interview a ton of them, and look for that combination of who you hit it off with, who has the best pay rate, and who seems to have a good reputation as a company. That's what you're looking for with those kinds of things. So compare all those rates, put them on paper. Try to see if you can get very similar jobs. And unfortunately, I think you have to have the exact same job. You can't compare one job in Houston, Texas, with a whole different system that one company has, A, another company has B. If one's higher, that doesn't really tell you who's paying higher. It just means that hospital's bill rate is higher. Please know that. Go back and listen to those episodes if any of this is foreign to you. You really need to be looking at the exact same position. That's the best way to be able to compare. Nothing frustrates me more than someone saying, oh, your pay rates are great. And I'm like, compared to what? Your pay rates are low compared to what? I want people to compare our company with very specific current positions. It's not okay for someone to say, wow, your pay rate is great, and I'm looking at a job in Tacoma and someone else is comparing a job in Seattle. I'm like, well, maybe that job pays higher or lower. So you got to look at the specific job to really know what company is offering the best pay package. So it has to be, it's this hospital in this city, and it's this shift, it's 12-hour nights, and it's posted right now, and here's what company A, B, and C are offering, and clearly company A is paying more, and but I like company B's recruiter. So this is where you have to make your own decision, and only you can make that decision. All right, so I guess to finalize this thought, for newbies, listen, I am not a big fan of how our industry works. I don't like the agency model currently. If you really step back and think about it, and here's where I'm going to repeat myself for those of you who heard this many times before, I want you to hear it if you've never have. I can only compare it with being a used car salesman. I mean, it's a cliche, and I'm not trying to offend anybody. That's a tough gig, by the way. But if you go in that realm, we all have primarily the same jobs. So for when you're coming across agencies that have the exact same job, realize that we're all selling the same stuff, and we're all selling it at different rates. And I can't for the life of me understand why a traveler would knowingly take a job at lower pay, with agency A over agency B. This is why you have to be very, very careful. I mean, if you think about our industry, it's a joke. Every company out there is trying to convince you to take a job with them, regardless of how thick their margins are or how thick or thin your pay package is. That's the farce. That's what makes me scratch my head. That's what keeps me up at night going, why don't people think about that? It's ridiculous. And tomorrow there'll be 2 more companies out there in the country that are going to jump on, do everything they can to get on with that vendor. And there's another 2 companies that have the same job, and they're going to do the exact same thing. They're going to have a better idea how to market you. They're going to have a better idea how to call you. They're going to have a better way to do it. But really what it comes down to is how much are they paying, and how are they how are they trying to differentiate themselves? And in my opinion, the only difference between company A and company B is how much money they're keeping and how much money they're letting free and they're clearing to go to you. That's the only decision companies have to make. You can't change how much a vendor is charging you if there's a vendor involved. You cannot change how much taxes you're paying for state, federal, state, local, if there is any in that particular, and if there is any state. That's all predicated and based upon the taxable hourly rate you're making. It's not based upon how much money they're giving you tax-free, so know that. So those are fixed figures based upon those amounts. The only other decision a company has to make is how much money are we keeping of the pie and how much money are we giving to the traveler, between taxable income and non-taxable income. That's the only decision. That's the only difference. And again, this industry has somehow, travelers have kind of forgotten that. Now, I think it's getting better, but it's amazing to me and so remarkable to me how many years and years and years that didn't seem to matter. It was all about a company, getting a good reputation. Now, the one thing that's never changed, and again, this is where I missed it, and I think I beat up monolith companies a lot. There is great value in a company that has a huge number of positions. And like I've always said, if I was a CEO of that company, I'd be promoting that. Now, they don't do a lot of promotions. They rely upon the fact that they do have the positions. So I don't care if it's good times or feast or famine times, they're always going to have a ton of positions. And I think there's some really good value to that. And I hope you guys hear me on that. I don't know if there are times when there's a lot of jobs, I think they fall down. And I think they probably are okay with that. I mean, they don't like it, but they probably understand that happens. When things are thin, they tend to be pushed up. And I don't think there's any way for anybody to control that. It is a supply and demand driven industry. And when you hold the contracts for most of these facilities, you are not going to release them to your counterparts who are subcontracting with you for them to offer it. You want to fill them yourself at the rates that are there. If you want this job, you've got to take it through us because we have the contract. That's a great thing for them at sometimes, but it's really, really important to compare other aspects. That is a plus and a feather in their cap. And when you're looking and you're finding when you're looking for your assignment and you've got your 3 people, you're going to be able to compare pretty heavily on what makes sense. And again, most travelers do this, and this is what I would probably recommend. See if and by the way, the recruiterless model should pay more than anybody else for the same job. So you're going to look, does my recruiterless option have a job, or how many jobs do they have in the areas in which I'm willing to go to? And great, I'm going to apply to those. A lot of them, or just a handful. If they don't have that many, then I'm going to apply to those first. I'm hoping I'm going to get those, but I'm not going to put all my eggs in that basket. I'm going to reach out to my next probably highest paying, and that's going to be my recruiter company, my mom and pop or lifestyle company, and I'm going to see what they can offer me. I'm going to validate that they're paying the highest. I'm going to check to make sure that they are, and if they aren't going to have it, I'm also going to apply to a handful of my plan C, because it is got to be, I can't not work. It's got to be my backup plan, but typically those are going to be the lowest paying. And now I feel like I'm going to potentially take the first one thing I get. If I'm getting a bunch of offers, then I know which one do I want. And it's probably going to be monetarily based, which means maybe the recruiterless company works, maybe the other one works. It's going to be who's got me an offer, how do I feel about my potential of getting another offer. I don't want to sit on one. You usually have about 24 to 48 hours max to accept it, and it'll be decision time. I've got these 2 offers, and I'm going to take this one because of this reason, and only you have the answer to that. And that's where you have to turn off the recruiter and make your decision on what you know is best for you. So that's that. So I guess to finalize that thought, I don't care if you're talking about a monolith company, you're talking about a standard recruiter company, recruiter-based company, or you're talking about a recruiterless model. I think you guys should contact a couple of them, or at least reach out to a couple of them. For those first two categories, I would call a bunch, and again, be willing to do the work. This is important stuff. I mean, most people tell you your agency is going to be a big part of your overall satisfaction on your assignment, and making a mistake early on is a tough lesson to learn. I would apply to a number of them, and I shouldn't apply. I would talk to as many of them as you can just possibly stand, and whittle it down to one of each of those. And for a recruiterless option, I would take a look at whatever it is, whether you're looking at a phone like with Next Gen MedStaff, or you're looking at a website. Look at the jobs they have and decide, does this company have what I'm looking for? Those models, again, this is going to sound like I'm promoting, but if you really think about it, if you don't have to send them any paperwork, then it doesn't hurt to be able, if you can see And I think some of the other companies, I think they show you that if you can see gross weekly pay amounts, it doesn't hurt to be on there. If they start asking you, like, in other words, if you're not seeing, what we have as anything of interest, and again, don't shoot the messenger. It's that bill rates are low. That means the hospital's got a low bill rate. We're at 17% across the board. So, and that, by the way, that will probably change if you're watching this a few years down the road. So don't know that we're a lower number by now if it's 2026 or 2025. But if you're not being asked to send in paperwork, and I guess if you're not from the first two, but most of them you have to, then I would be willing to apply to a number of recruiterless options. I would I would be looking at a number of different options. If it's an app like ours is where it notifies you, it doesn't hurt to have it. I think I would add that regardless. I mean, it makes sense. But you got to whittle these down. If you're being asked to send paperwork, I am not going to tell you that I think, 3 is a good number. If you're willing to do 5, and again, whether it's any of those 3 options, if you actually have to send in paperwork, then you know what kind of pain you're willing to go through. And listen, I get it. A resume is easy to send. Certifications are typically easy, and you should have those. I didn't mention that episode 1. You should have those in a packet where you can shoot them off. Typically, a company's going to ask you to do their skills checklist. So it's that self-evaluation. If you have and I'll give them a plug, Relias type skills checklist that is universal, that makes life really easy for you. If you happen to have access to that, or you're willing to go and do that yourself, that makes life easy, because most agencies, whether recruiter-based or recruiter-less, will accept the Relias because it's more of a test. Most of you guys stress out about those more, but if you're willing to do that, then it doesn't hurt to apply to more companies. It makes it easier. But I think there's a point where you just don't want everybody having it. One of the big reasons is that for any of those companies, you have to validate and make sure that you're not being submitted to jobs that you haven't discussed or that you don't want to go in front of. That is such a crucial part of our industry. And to this day, companies still do that. You'll have a recruiter typically, or they're being taught this, that goes a little rogue, and you wanted this location, but they put you in front of that one because they just knew you'd want to take it. That makes you look bad in the industry, and then you actually don't get the job with the company that pays higher. That's one of the tricks and reasons why they do it. Well, we submitted you, so you have to take it with us, even though these other 3 or 4 or 200 companies are paying more than they are. You feel like you have to take it. And I've had facilities say you got to take it with them. It is horse what. You shouldn't do that. But that's one of the reasons why you don't want to give too many people your information, because they will start submitting you. Like it or not, as a recording of this, it's still happening. So I think you need to whittle those down. I think that's how much are you willing to put out there. You don't have to follow my model of 3. I don't think you should do less than 3. I think you should do 1 of each of those. And I think if you can do more, then I would recommend do more, because it's just going to give you more information to a point. When you start feeling like these too many people have my stuff and I need to be in control, which you should always be in control of where you're being submitted and with whom you're being submitted to. You work at the hospital, you work through an agency. Don't ever make an agency feel like you work for them. You don't. You work for a facility or for a system, and you're working through a company. That's about as much credit as I can give us. It is not working for us. We have very little to do with it, except for to float your payroll for 6 weeks. Again, this industry, most agencies take too much credit, like they're working for you. They're not. They're working for the hospital or for the vendor, and they happen to choose your agency. So please keep that in mind. So whittle that down. All right. Compare all pay rates, compare all locations before you choose your thing. I've said that already. I want to repeat myself. You've got to use your marketability. Here's where that comes into play, and I want to explain that to you. This is, I think, more than anything, and I kind of mentioned this at the beginning of this episode, but here's why I want to go to a little more detail, and I'm going to really hit you on this with as much as I can. Truly, between seasonality, between the market trends, and between your level of experience, this is where you need to make decisions on how much do I need to stick with my plan A, how willing am I, and how marketable am I before I go to my plan B or my plan C. And that's where you've got to have a really honest conversation with yourself. This is where, again, for many of you, the monolith company might be your only choice for a little while. So realize that. I think you should still look at some other potentials. I think you should go for it because, this industry is not very predictable. You might get very lucky and you might have, I don't know, you never know. The manager of that unit may have gone to the same, school that you went to, and that's all that they needed. You just don't know why you're getting chosen. There may be some, something about a place you work that might connect with who the hiring person that you just don't know. And I've seen so many weird things in this industry for this many years. I've seen amazing candidates, both allied and nursing, not get calls and not get offers. And then I've seen people that I did not expect to get an offer. It's as common or almost as common as when you know someone's going to get a deal. I like really strong quality candidates that are willing to go in front of a bunch of places. So that's where I'm going to push you guys in the marketability, regardless of who you are working with and how many people you're working with. If you're not getting instant calls, you got to be careful not to blame the agency. I think, again, it has to do with how many people you're putting in front, how many jobs you're being truly submitted to, how long they've been sitting there. We'll talk about that in a minute. And what your marketability is more than anything else. This is where you really have to be realistic. And it's hard. I think we all as humans want to, and I think we should. I think you got to pump yourself up. I think you got to put yourself on a pedestal. Nobody else does. I think you got to be careful not to be, egocentric about it. But you need to be proud of what you are and who you are. We don't treat ourselves very nicely. That being said, you also have to be very realistic. You have to have an honest conversation with yourself. If you have less experience than the average person that you're probably competing against, then you need to realize that, yes, I'm going to go for that big position. I'm going to go for that high dollar or that fantastic location or one that has both. But I also need to make sure I'm got a backup plan. And again, I think this is where, for many of you, the monolith company might end up delivering for you more often. I think that the recruiterless model might deliver for you the least, because if they're paying the most, they've got more people that are going to them. I know with our company, we tend to have some very strong travelers that put their stuff into us because they're going to get the job and they want the job at the highest rate, which means they're going to go with us and they'll get it. It doesn't mean that we don't get jobs for people that don't have that much experience, but it seems like we have more people that have solid experience that are saying, hey, I can work with this company. That is not to turn you guys off on working with us. I still, like I said, get surprises. I have people that I just don't think, wow, gosh, she only went in front of one position and she only has this amount of experience, or he does, and boom, they get it. So you've got to go for it. But you really do need to talk and think about your marketability. Listen to that episode. Figure out how high in the pecking order you are, and realize that if you're dealing with a recruiter company, whether it's a monolith or a ready company, that also comes into play with how much attention is that recruiter giving you. When you're dealing with a recruiterless application, that's a good thing about that. You are not being judged or scrutinized based upon how much money someone's going to make who's submitting you. And that's a really important concept to think about. So that's why I like going in front of those jobs if you can, but don't just put all your eggs in that basket. The great thing about a recruiterless model, because I may not remember to say this, is that there's no discrimination based upon, in other words, there's nobody at those companies, and I can't speak for other ones, but I know for ours, we don't sit there and go, there's nobody that's trying to figure out who gets submitted first or who gets a call first. It doesn't happen. It comes right here. So every single psych RN that was looking for Indiana, if an Indiana job comes up at the exact same second, which is almost instantaneous to it being posted, they all get the notification. And the first one that gets in front is put in first. If it's an hour later someone goes, they're put in front of it. There's no discrimination based upon someone saying, ooh, is this person going to make me money? Am I going to call her about this psych job in Indiana? Or am I going to call him? Or is psych not even I'm going to look at the cath lab, nurses. I'm going to look at the occupational therapist first, and I'm going to go down that order because I make more commission. That is one wonderful thing about that third option, and most people don't think about that, and I'm trying to implore you to do that. You have no discrimination based upon your marketability, your ability to secure a job, your experience, your specialty, your level of acuity. I mean, there's no difference between a surge tech and an operating room nurse, because some companies, a recruiter's going to go, I make twice as much money on an RN, especially if they're first assist and I do a surge tech, so I want to call the RNs first. Realize that happens. I don't mean to paint the bad picture, but it's true. They make more money, so who do you think they're going to call first? And that's one wonderful aspect of a recruiter's model. And again, I can't speak for the companies, but if they're ran like ours are, you apply, you got your paperwork, and you get submitted instantly, regardless of how many jobs you're going in front of, or what your level is, or how many years of experience you have. So you're in the same boat, but once you're in front, it is going to be based, probably and potentially on that manager on who has the most experience. So I'm just telling you that look for that. Look at your marketability and be willing to kind of open up and kind of figure out, that. Let's talk about some details now. When it comes to any company, I don't care what model we're looking at, monolith, recruiter-based, recruiterless. Again, this is why I would tell you guys, please, please, please go back and listen to 2 important episodes if you haven't already. I think it's episode 41 is hours 36 to 40 is what it's titled. And I think there's one on holiday or overtime or callback. It's all the same thing. If I'm repeating myself and you guys have heard this, either listen to it again or fast forward, a couple minutes. It won't be that long. If you're working 40 hours a work week or 40 hours a week, whether it's 10 hours, 4 10s or 5 8s, or if you're the type of traveler that if you're on a 12-hour shift and you only work those 36 hours and you never anticipate getting a 37th hour or even a 36.25 hours, then this won't apply to you. It won't matter. However, sorry, I'm going to pause this because I got a dry throat. I got to get some water. Hang tight. I'm going to come back. I'm going to pause it. I don't usually do this, but I've got to. Otherwise, I'm not going to get through this. All right, thank you guys. I had to get my water. I won't drink in front of the microphone because I hate that sound. I won't do that to you guys. I'm irritating enough. Let's talk about hours 36 to 40 because I want to give this some time. Remember, we have a bill rate. For those of you guys that don't know this, we're going to say it's $100 an hour because that's pretty common. $90, $100 an hour. The first thing a company does when they are looking at quoting you a pay package is that they're taking the number of weeks that assignment is being offered for, and they're multiplying it by the number of anticipated minimum hours a week you're going to get. So either 36 or 40. Unless it's a 48-hour guarantee. We'll talk about that. I'm not going to talk about that, but that's a different monster entirely. The first thing that every recruiter has in front of them, the first thing that our app does is it spits out that gross weekly based upon that amount. How much is it? So what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we're taking 13 weeks, typically, by 36 hours, which comes to 468 hours. That is our assumption that is the number of hours that you are going to work, minimally. That people get sick, people work overtime, but we're not going to think about that because we're just quoting you a pay rate. There's no way for a recruiter to sit there and anticipate that. One qualification, before I do that, if you're working 40 hours and you multiply that by 13 weeks, it's 520. And obviously the less hour or less weeks, if it's an 8-week assignment or if it's a 26-week assignment, that all should come into play with an agency's software and how they're going to quote a rate. One wrinkle I want to tell you guys about, and we talked about it in Unbillable BS, an episode called that, is that I can't speak for other companies, but most companies do this. There are systems out there that, for example, a big common thing is they're saying we can't bill for the first 8 hours of orientation. Now, again, you guys are going to find, I'm going to tell you everything. My company, for those assignments, and I'd say maybe 33% of our assignments are that way. Most of our assignments to this day still allow us to bill for orientation. I think the bigger we get, the more vendors we go with, the more systems that are starting to catch on. Hey, we cannot, bill have the company bill us for the first 8 hours. It'll get bigger. But again, right now, on those assignments, our app automatically takes that 468, for example, and makes it 460 hours. So it slightly adjusts your rate because we can't bill for that. And we're not going to just pay someone for free. So that's why we pay for every hour of orientation, because it's all part of it. We know that we're looking at a total of 460 real billable hours. So we do that math automatically. And I'm kind of explaining that differently, but most companies will do that. Most companies will do that. Some companies do that regardless of whether there's orientation or not. They have a sweeping thing that's 10 hours or whatever. I've seen as many as 40 hours for some assignments. The first 40 hours are not billable. Well, a company, especially one that's on a super thin margin, cannot afford to eat that. It may surprise you, but 1 week typically is our profit. It's almost like we basically break even for 12 weeks, and that 13th week is all of our money. So if we're giving that week for free, we basically work for free. It doesn't make sense. So there's no way a company can survive doing that. But the first thing, regardless of what I just said, the first thing that we are doing is we are calculating an anticipated number of total hours for the assignment. That's how we get to the figure of what we're going to be able to pay you taxable, because the tax-free amount is typically fixed, based upon the GSA, that sort of thing. Some companies have different models that they use for that. But those are all finite numbers, so it's a really easy calculation. It does it automatically. We're saying what's left over based upon a company's margin. So here's my question for you, and for those of you that are newbies, you may not understand this, but what you're going to see if you've never traveled before is every agency out there is going to say, here is your taxable income for your hourly rate, and they're based that on 36 or 40, and here's what we're going to pay you because they've already done the math. Here's your weekly, catch me if I'm not saying, get this right, here's your weekly amount of your stipend. We do it too. It's based upon how much the GSA is in our case, and we multiply that by 7 days a week. What do they allow for meals and incidentals? And here's also your weekly housing stipend. So if you really think about it, take the housing away, but your compensation really is a taxable hourly rate and a weekly amount, which really means we've just carved out that weekly amount because we multiplied it by 7 days a week. Really what that is that's still your income, if you follow me. Just one happens to be taxable and one is tax-free. So for those first 36 hours, in our case, we've maximized that tax-free amount and we've given it to you tax-free. So when it comes to, let's say, a 37th hour, we can't give you any more tax-free. And this is the term and what most travel agencies hide behind. If you ask for, I want both of those things. I mean, why am I only getting taxable? And they'll say, well, we've maximized your tax-free, which I've always said is a true statement. They have maximized your tax-free in many cases, but that's still your income. It doesn't change the fact that up between 0 and 36 hours in this case, your income is based upon taxable and tax-free, but it's still both your income. They just carved out some of it because they can as meals and incidentals, but that is still your money. So why is it that on that 37th hour, they only give you a portion of it? Sometimes it's 70%, sometimes 80%. What companies should be doing is saying, let's take that amount. Let me grab a calculator here on my phone. And a common one is, I'll say, is 413. That is like I think the lowest meals and incidentals rate in the country, where it's a pretty rural area and it's the lower cost of living, and there's a finite number, but it's 413, which I know comes to 11 and something. So here's what I'm doing, so you guys know. Make sure I get a calculator app open here. So what I'm doing is I'm taking, in this case, $413, which you guys will see as a common weekly meals and incidentals figure. I'm going to divide that by 36 hours because that's how many hours that is. That's a weekly amount. I'm only working 36. So what does that come to hourly? Well, it comes to $11.47 an hour. That just happens to be your income based upon 7 days a week, but it's tax-free based upon 36 hours, if that makes sense. What companies should be doing is they should be saying, I'm going to give you that $11.47. I'm going to add it to, let's just say, your $45 an hour. That was your taxable rate, if that makes sense. And now I'm going to take that, and now you're making $56.47 an hour for hours 36 to 40. And the drum roll, we're going to tax you on all that because we have to, because we have in fact maximized your tax-free amount. This is fair. It's fair for two reasons. One of them is on that 37th hour, my bill rate's still $100. So if I'm only giving you, if I'm taking $11.47 in this case, or $11.42 or 42, and I'm not paying you on that, regardless if it's taxable or not taxable, then I'm ripping you off for $11.42 an hour because my bill rate stayed the same, but all of a sudden what I'm paying out goes less. If you follow me on that, I hope that makes sense. I just kept $11.47 of your money for that 37th hour instead of giving it to you. And of course, companies will say, well, it's taxable, so I'm going to pay payroll tax on it. Yeah, guess what? It's also an additional hour that's above that 468 that we weren't anticipating. So we didn't figure that into your pay calculation when we were quoting your rate, remember? This is a bonus hour. And if you do it every week, there's going to be 13 of these, right? It's 13 more hours that you work that we didn't anticipate. Your pay rate was not quoted on that additional 13 hours. So it's extra money. So why a company has to improve their margin instead of decreasing it makes no sense. With our company, you guys will see it right on our app. It shows, here's what we're paying for hours 36 to 40. That's the simple math we're doing. We're taking the number of anticipated hours, if it's 36, and we have divided that meals and incidentals rate by 36 to come up with that additional amount. We put it on to your taxable amount, and we're taxing you on all of it. That, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, that higher figure, in this case, 40, what did I say, 47? I can't remember now. I got to open it back up. 56.47 should be what is multiplied by 1.5 to get you your overtime, your callback, and your holiday pay. In this case, it's $84.71. Most companies are just going to take that $45 and multiply it by 1.5. I don't know why I did the math on that, and give you $67.50. Again, extra hours that we were anticipating. And this is where I think you guys really need to start thinking about this stuff. Why a company has more hours than they were anticipating over the course of assignment, quoted you on a minimum, yet you're getting more money and they've increased their margin and decreased your take home. Makes zero sense to me. And they're doing it for when you work overtime too. And some companies kind of skip the 36 to 40 and they say, hey, here's a higher overtime rate than more than 1.5. That's what they're doing. They're kind of getting you for those 4 hours by not paying you any more, keeping $11, in our case, $11.42 or whatever that was, 72 cents for 4 hours. Then they're paying you slightly higher for the last 8. They've already made a ton more money off of you than they were thinking about. It's wrong. So here's what I went through all of that to tell you guys. You've got to find a company that pays you properly. I am hearing, since I've been chirping on this for about 7 years now, that there's a few more companies that are doing this. I've had many people say, hey, I actually got paid that way from one of my companies. It's because if you're a newbie, you don't know this, but veteran travelers are demanding this. And again, I hope as this episode ages that more and more, as time goes by, this is becoming less of an issue. I really hope in 5 years someone goes, what is he talking about? Everyone pays like that, because it didn't used to be like it is now. People are now agreeing to getting only the taxable rate for hours 36 to 40 and only time and a half of that taxable rate for anything that is, for overtime. It's just time and a half of the taxable. That makes 0 sense. We're talking about 12 hours more typically than what we were anticipating that week. The margin should be reduced. That was a lot of discussion, but I think this is super important. And again, I really am hoping that more and more companies do this. You guys, this is wrong. It's just wrong. This is the kind of stuff that I think makes our industry look like what. It makes it look sleazy. It makes it look like I described earlier. And we got to stop that. You guys are in charge. If you stop working for companies that do that, and you ethically can explain to them, and your recruiter, this is why that relationship is so important, and you can say, hey, how come I'm not making this? You guys have already more than made your money back on your profit, I should say. Your profit model has been satisfied based upon my 36 hours. So why are you increasing your margins after that? And why are you, really increasing your margins? If I work really hard, you guys should be getting more of the pie, which means, again, it doesn't seem like you're getting more of the pie, but the fact is we're going to pay higher payroll taxes on hours 36 to 40. I'm okay with that. It reduces our margin. We're making less significantly because it's bonus for us, but it should be more bonus for you. And then overtime, it's the same thing. We're paying even higher on those payroll taxes. We're barely making a lot of margin on that because it's just enough to kind of justify how long it takes for us to get paid. It is almost a break even for us on overtime, but all of it ends up going to you, and a lot of it goes to our bank because we're paying interest on that for a while because it is what it is. I'm okay with that because these are extra hours, and I want to reward my travelers for doing for working harder. The truth is, almost every other company out there punishes you and actually takes more of a margin. So you got to have this understanding, and that's why I went through this. If any of this is making sense to you, go back and listen to that episode. It will now, because it'll be a better description. This is why it's so important to prepare yourself as a newbie. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars a year. Just minimally, if you just do some math on a company that's just paying you more money, let alone a company that's paying you properly for 3640 and properly for holiday, callback, and overtime, if those things come a lot for you, you're really walking away from a whole bunch of money because of the company that you chose. So be super careful. I want to say this. You are the commodity. And again, I've said this to a lot of other people, but if this is the first time you've watched me, understand that as a newbie, you're a commodity still. Are you less valuable? Yep, I'm going to tell you that. You're less valuable commodity than other people because it probably takes you more time. You have to be submitted to more places to get a position. But if you follow what I'm telling you, you're going to get positions right away because you're not going to go for the ones that everybody else is. You're going to start building your resume and building your career. You're valuable to every company out there, regardless of how you feel. You're the commodity. You guys have to start acting like that. Start making us agencies do things right. This is not the way it was when I first got in this industry. It became a thing 10, 12, 15 years ago where companies stopped paying properly for hours 36 to 40 and overtime. This is one example of how you've got to be smart and you've got to know your numbers. So if this is kind of scaring you, it's okay. You can get it from us at Travel Evolve. You can get it from some of your mentors, the people that know what they're doing. If you're talking to another traveler, they don't know what you're talking about, it's not the right person to take advice from. And turn them on to this too, because it might open their eyes too as well. But I want you guys to understand that from now on, you need to know that every one of us agencies is working and doing our best to become attractive to you so that you guys work for us. I'm doing it by paying you a lot more money and paying you properly. And I'm making life easier. And I'm making it so that you aren't waiting around for a recruiter, or you're not having to put everything you're looking for and every change you make through a recruiter. You can do it instantly on your phone. I think that's the way it's going to go in the future of it. And I think if you're a newbie and you're younger, you probably agree with me. I think it's some of the older travelers that are kind of stuck in their ways that don't quite see that, but it's what's coming. It just doesn't make sense to do it the old way anymore. So, okay, now you've got your model. I'm going to turn the pages. I'm getting close. I know this episode's taking a long time. I knew it would, but this one I wanted to spend some time with because I felt kind of bad about the first one that I just basically said go and watch a bunch of episodes. But that one still, by the way, is more important than this one, right? It just is. So be careful of staying with any company if you're not seeing what you're looking for. again, if you have to turn paperwork into them, if you can see things and you can communicate, if you can talk to a recruiter without having to, and he or she will work as hard and send you job details, right? They're not going to do anything until they send the paperwork in. And trust me, they won't. But if you can find that, or if you've got a recruiterless model, whether it's online or an app or whatever, and you can look at stuff, fine. But if you're not getting what you're looking for from those other two categories, or if you have to apply and actually send paperwork to a bunch of companies that are recruiterless, then you've got to be willing to change quickly. And again, you know how much applications you can do, but it's really important at the very beginning, as you build marketability based upon your level of experience and your experience as a traveler, your value is going to increase. You have to be willing to say, hey, this recruiter, my relationship has changed with him or her, or this monolith company, maybe that I'm seeing where I'm starting to get more jobs from plan B and plan A and plan B and not having to drop down to plan C. This is where you need to drop companies and start putting your efforts into higher paying, companies, regardless of what their model is. And that's why I will say, and I gave a lot of kudos to monolith companies, but they're probably going to be the first people that you dump once you start seeing that you're getting offers from higher paying positions. It just makes sense. It doesn't mean you're going to dump them. I still think it'd be crazy not to, you can contact them when you need them. Instead of telling everybody you want a job, you're going to start saying, hey, tell this thing I want a job. If I don't get it, I'm going to go to this next step down and the next step down to that. The point I'm making is be willing to change, especially if your recruiter changes, or especially if your relationship with somebody that you're dealing with, if you're having to deal with that recruiter. If it's starting to feel like you're doing all the work and they're not working in your best interest, then it's time for you to switch companies. It just isn't. Don't be upset or don't have a heavy heart about that. They aren't doing their job, and that's part of the game, is that they've got to treat you like gold. Remember, I just said you're the commodity. If you're starting to feel like you're doing all the work, then you better start making more money from it by working with a recruiterless model than that. So be willing to separate from a recruiter or from a company that doesn't feel like they're delivering for you, is what I guess I'm getting at. Here's a couple things I want you to think about. With a monolith company, how bad is their pay? How much of a number are you? That's going to be the first thing that's going to have you leave. With a recruiter company, how hard are they working for you? Remember, for those of you that think you have to have a recruiter, I'm going to ask you this question. Is having a recruiter worth whatever the difference is between a recruiterless and a recruiter company? Sometimes it's, during the pandemic, it was $1,000 a week that we were paying. I remember an LPN, she's done a couple promos for us, that were an LPN was making $1,000 more with us a week than she was seeing with any other company. Now, that was when the rates were completely high. I certainly can't say that now. But based upon the bill rates, the bigger the bill rate, in other words, the more demand there is, the more a disparagement between companies is going to show up. When the rates are low, they all kind of look the same. But even $50 a week is important. $50 a week times 52 weeks of the year, and then start talking about that 36 to 40 and how is that being paid and how much is overtime. It's significant. It multiplies pretty quickly. So don't kind of poo-poo a $50 difference in pay rates. I don't know why you'd willingly take an assignment with a company that pays $50 less than somebody else, because it's going to start to increase. That means they're losing their competition level, and they're starting to lose jobs to companies that are paying more. And I think this is how you guys change the industry. So be aware of that. How high are you on their priority? This is where I'm going to spend a little bit of time, but I don't want to go too long in this episode, too late. With any recruiter company, like I said earlier, you have to be prioritized. And that's just a simple fact, and you guys have to recognize that. When you're having an honest look at your marketability, realize that a recruiter is having whether it's honest or not, their opinion of how fast they can make money. How easy are you to make commission on? In other words, how fast can I book this person? And there's so many variables based upon that. And a lot of it, we'll throw them out there. How many years experience do they have? That's a real thing, right? How many years of travel do they have? What kind of licenses do they have? In other words, are they in for nursing? Are they compact license? Are they a surge tech that they can go to almost every state, and they've got the other states that require specific state licensures? Are they that marketable? How willing are they to go anywhere? What is their specialties? Especially it's in high demand, or is it especially that seems to have fewer positions, and when there's just a whole bunch of people that get submitted to them? All these things come into play, and please know that a recruiter looks at you when they get a job in, and they see their list, and it changes throughout the day, and they see, for example, I'll just take a psych position. I said that earlier. If a psych position comes up, they're going to say, okay, which one of my travelers is willing to go to that location? All right, now which one of my travelers, my candidates, also is willing to go for that rate or less? So they're eliminating people, and then they're saying, okay, now who's the first call I'm going to make? And the chances of it being you are slim. There's probably somebody who's willing to take a lower pay or has more marketability. They're going to reach out and say, hey, I guess got 4 jobs in, and here's where they all are, and that candidate might go in front of all of them. You may be only willing to go in front of one, or you might not be willing to go in front of any on paper, and they're going to try to call and sell you and talk you into it. That prioritization comes into play every second of every day in a recruiter's life, and it's something that nobody talks about. But not everybody is getting the first phone call or getting the first text or is getting the first response or whatever it is, however they communicate with you. They are prioritizing what is the most important and fastest candidates that I can explain this position to right now today that's going to reap the fastest rewards. In other words, who's going to get the job fastest, and I'm going to start making commission, and I can book that traveler. And if you're lower on that list, you're going to get calls less than, a lot later. So you have to realize how big of a priority am I in for this recruiter. And if you're starting to recognize it, they're telling me about jobs that came out, I'm making a phone call at the end of the day, and I know I got another recruiter calling me about it earlier in the day, or I saw on my app that it came out last night, and I actually applied with Next Gen Med Staff, and I'm already in front of it waiting for the manager this morning. And while the recruiter is calling to tell me, these are things you have to consider. If your recruiter is not prioritizing you high, you got to get rid of that recruiter and that potential that company and find someone else that's going to put a little bit more stock in you and be willing to make a phone call. But you guys are always being prioritized no matter what, and it's not something anybody talks about. Like I said, is that recruiter selling you or are they listening to you? That's the other biggest complaint we hear, and I've heard it for all up until 3 years ago. A recruiter's job is to make money, and they're to make money for the company. And if they aren't performing, they're not going to have that job much longer. And then after that, if they are making money, they're trying to make as much money for themselves and their family as they can. I mean, we can't blame them. But do you understand that it is that you can't get rid of that? And I shouldn't say you can't get rid of it. You can get rid of it, but people aren't getting rid of that. So it exists. So you've got to kind of look and say, are they selling me or are they really listening to me? Am I getting phone calls and about jobs that I don't really want because the recruiter is trying to push me? And I would say the same thing. If you're working with a recruiterless model, you've got to be honest with yourself and look at or put in the jobs that you're willing to take. Because if you only put the jobs that you want to take, you're going to get sold by a recruiter, and the company probably had that job for higher pay. You've got to treat yourself like a recruiter. So if you're looking at a website company, you've got to say, now, I'm not seeing where I really like where I'm there. Let me look at some other places that I'm willing to go to. And all of a sudden you start seeing some jobs there that a recruiter has, but it should be paying higher. Again, that's why I love our model, is that you get to decide what you see and what you look at, and it's instant. So just know that some recruiters are starting to sell you. If you start to feel you're being sold and they're clearly not hearing you, then it's time for you to switch those companies for sure. For those agencies, you need to be very precise about where and why and how much money you're willing to go to those assignments for. Again, one of the benefits, and I know I keep talking about this, but one of the benefits of a recruiterless model is that you should instantly be able to change your variables. I now am willing to I don't want to go there and I want to go to these areas, or I want to add these areas. What's wonderful about it is in tough times, you can start to expand your circle. Maybe you've given a recruiterless model your choice A, and now it's time to give them a choice B and choice C, so you start to see those. You can do that 24 hours a day with a recruiterless model, and if you can't, you've got to call and try to get that message to that recruiter, hope that he or she took notice of it, followed your instructions, and is now going to either change or tweak or add to your destination or your pay rate requirements. Again, you guys see why this is so fundamentally archaic and nobody's willing to talk about it. It makes zero sense at all. And even if it wasn't paying more, which all recruiterless options should pay more, it still makes more sense. Sorry, I keep doing that. All right, so you got to be willing to switch. And what I'm saying is that for a lot of these recruiter models, if you don't like what you're seeing from your recruiter, you got to be willing to do some more paperwork. So that's just something you got to commit to. It is investment in yourself, right? So you don't want to make bad decisions. That's why you whittle it down to a few. But quickly, if you're not seeing the response, or you're not getting the kind of prioritization you feel, or if you feel like you're being sold, you got to switch quick and be willing to do that paperwork so someone else will start working on your behalf. Okay. Last thing I want to say, and that was a lot. It was a long episode, but we're going to assume that you are looking at any offer and you are looking at it through educated eyes before you get it. This was about securing your first assignment. So Next week, I'm going to talk about what happens there, and we're going to talk about everything from credentialing to how to continue and how to advance your travel career and what that first assignment is going to look like, and so you kind of know. But I'm going to assume at the end of this episode that any offer you're getting, you are comfortable and familiar and you understand that offer and there's no question. So if you're choosing to work with a company that just pays you taxable income on hours 36 to 40 and you're okay with that, bless your heart. And if they're only willing to pay a time and a half, that great. If you're willing to go for a lower rate, that's fine. None of that is anybody's business, and nobody should be out there trying to sell you or not sell you, if that makes sense. I think it's weird, but if you have a very compelling reason why that makes sense, then who am I to judge, right? That shouldn't be part of our industry, and I don't want it to be. So that's why I'm giving recommendations about getting some options out there. But regardless, you got to know what you're looking at. And we're going to start, next week's episode. I'm going to say tomorrow, but it's not going to be until next week. Off about those numbers and being able to really read an offer well. And you got to know what you're doing. It's incredibly important. Do not start this phase I talked about. I'm going to say it again. Phase 2, securing your first assignment. Please promise me, if you haven't put in the prep work, which was the first part of Newbie Boot Camp, you should not be doing any of the stuff I talked about today. It's that important, guys and gals. You have to understand what you're looking at. You have to make sure this is right for you. I'm assuming you did all that before you listened to this episode, and this is why I wanted you to really start to get your feet wet, start actually looking at jobs. You got to be ready, know that you can start within a couple of weeks, and you got to have your ducks in a row. If you don't, go back and do some more work. You owe it to yourself. Wow. It's only 8. No, it's 9:15. It's pretty late here. So it's very late out there, and I had a full day of work, so I'm pretty exhausted. I'm going to end it here, guys. I hope this was helpful. We'll catch you for part 3 next week. Appreciate you listening, guys. We will catch you next time on Travel Evolved.